The fog had settled like a veil over the shallow pools and crooked trees of the basin, softening every sound, every shadow. Little Storm, smaller than he'd one day grow to be, but already quiet and thoughtful, stepped carefully over a moss-slicked log. His paws barely made a sound. Trapeze had let him wander farther this time. Not too far, of course. Just far enough that he could no longer see the gentle gleam of her eyes through the mist. But he could still feel her, the way a flickering candle might linger behind closed eyes. He was free to explore, and he was exploring, just in his own way. From behind the warped trunk of a withered tree he saw them. A group of juvenile ghost types, mischievous, a couple of Drifloon, even a faintly glowing Litwick, were twirling in a slow looping game above the swamp water, laughter like soft echoes rippling through the air. Storm watched them silently, his wide violet eyes half-lidded, unreadable. The mist curled around him like it belonged to him, like it knew he didn't want to be seen. They seemed happy, or at least full of that strange glowing energy that others called fun. But Storm didn't feel drawn to it. Not out of fear, not even out of shyness, just detachment. Like the way the moonlight danced on water. Pretty, but cold and far away. One of the Drifloon looked his way, one stringy arm floating in a slow wave. Storm blinked at them. He didn't return the gesture. The Drifloon tilted slightly, then turned back to the game. Storm exhaled softly through his nose and turned away. A patch of pale mushrooms growing in the roots of a twisted tree caught his eye instead. They were faintly bioluminescent, glowing a pale blue. That was more interesting than the game. He crouched beside them, tilting his head. One of them twitched, not from the wind, but something else. Something else. Something that lingered beneath the roots. Storm didn't flinch. He just watched. Whatever it was, it didn't scare him. He knew things moved differently here in the basin. Some things lived, some things didn't. Some things didn't need to. Behind him, laughter rippled again. A splash, a squeal. It sounded distant already. Storm stayed where he was, tracing a line in the damp soil with one claw. A gentle creak echoed through the mist, soft, rhythmic, like a lullaby played on an old swing. Storm didn't look up. He didn't need to. He felt it. The slight shift in the air, the presence wrapping around him like worn fabric and candle wax. Then, "Little Shadow," came the voice, sweet and hoarse like leaves dragged across stone. "We wandered far today." Storm turned his head. From between two bowed reeds, Trapeze emerged, her ragged arms stitched from darkness and thread. Her zipper mouth curled into something not quite a smile, but not unkind either. One eye gleamed dimly, the other was missing its shine. She stood in silence beside him, her tall, crooked figure casting a slanted shadow over the patch of glowing mushrooms. Storm didn't apologize. He didn't need to. Trapeze never scolded him for being quiet, never tried to fill his silence with questions or false cheer. Instead, she crouched beside him, her form shifting with a loose rustle. They stared at the mushrooms together. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she murmured after a moment. Her voice didn't disturb the stillness. It was part of it. Storm nodded once. From deep in the roots, the faintest flicker of pale blue flame pulsed and vanished. Trapeze tilted her head, considering. Old spirit, soft one. Doesn't remember who it was. Storm blinked slowly. That felt true. She reached out and, with a finger like a worn ribbon, gently tugged one of the larger mushrooms free and set it on a flat stone beside him. "Sometimes they like to be seen," she said, as though explaining a secret only they could know. Storm didn't speak, but he leaned slightly against her, just enough to brush her frayed side. Her hand moved in response, resting lightly over his back. In the distance, the ghost Pokemon still laughed, their silhouettes flickering like will-o-wisps through the fog. "You don't have to join them," Trapeze whispered, almost too softly for sound. "Your place doesn't have to look like theirs." Storm's gaze lingered on the mushrooms, then the stone, then the tree. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The fog shifted again, drawing in tighter, folding the basin back around them like a blanket made of secrets and shadows. They stayed there for a while, quiet together. And when they walked home, it was without a word, but with Trapeze's fingers lightly brushing his fur, and Storm occasionally glancing back at the stone, where the mushroom still sat, glowing, waiting. In the heart of the ruins where the show resided, a den had been dug out of sight not long after Storm had begun to walk. The hollow of their den was stitched from mist and bark, tucked under the roots of a gnarled willow. Thin lantern moss clung to the ceiling, casting soft green light over the pile of dried leaves and shredded cloth that made up Storm's nest. He lay curled there, not asleep, but quiet. His ears twitched faintly with each distant croak or rustle, but his eyes were fixed on a patch of shadow clinging to the wall. He'd been watching it for a while, like he was waiting for it to move. Trapeze was near, sitting on the far side of the den. She was doing something strange with an old puppet, a scrap-filled doll she sometimes repaired without ever explaining why. Her fingers moved with long, practiced rhythm, weaving thread through worn cloth. Storm finally broke the silence. "Why am I like this?" His voice was soft, barely a whisper, like he wasn't sure if the question should be asked aloud. Trapeze's stitching paused mid-thread. The silence stretched, and the only sound was the fog whispering through the willow roots above. "Like what, little shadow?" Storm's tail twitched. He didn't turn to look at her. "I don't feel things the way the others do." He shifted, drawing his limbs tighter. "They laugh and run and make noise all the time, but I just watch. I feel quiet. Sometimes I think they don't even see me." A pause. His claws dug gently into the bedding. "Is that wrong?" The weight of that question filled the room like mist after rain. Storm didn't cry. He never really did. But his voice was raw around the edges, like old bark peeled too thin. Trapeze set the puppet down beside her. It slumped like a sleeping thing, and she rose with slow grace, her form flickering subtly as she crossed the room. She sat beside Storm without a sound, her shadow stretching along across the wall. Then, softly, "Tell me, do you ever see the moon sigh when it does not burn like the sun?" Storm blinked, confused, but shook his head. "Do you see the fog apologize for hiding the trees?" He didn't answer. Trapeze leaned closer, her voice a raspy hush, gentle and sharp all at once. "You are like the fog, little one, like the shadow between stars. You were never meant to shine like fire. You were meant to glow like embers." Her hand, cold and worn like silk that had survived centuries, gently cupped his cheek. "Different is not broken. Quiet is not wrong. You see things others do not, feel things they cannot. The world needs eyes like yours." Storm's breath caught, not in pain, not in fear, just in knowing. He turned his head and pressed into her palm. She stayed perfectly still, letting him rest there. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and a drifting wisp floated past the den entrance. Small, pale, curious. Storm watched it. It paused as if to greet him, then passed on without sound. He didn't follow. But he smiled, just a little. The silence settled again, a peaceful stillness between them. Storm's eyes had grown heavy, half-lidded from her comfort, but they opened again when Trapeze's hand lingered at his fur-line, fingers tracing over the spot where his fur grew a little paler near the ruff of his neck. "There are others, you know," she murmured, her voice gentler than dusk. "Others who feel the world not through noise or games, but through weight, through wind, through quiet things." Storm didn't respond right away. His ears twitched, but he remained curled against her. "You mean ghosts?" Trapeze gave a soft, amused breath that might have once been a chuckle. "No, little shadow, I mean blood." Storm blinked. Slowly, he turned his head to look up at her, violet eyes full of questions. She gazed down at him, with that one glinting eye, the dim one seeming to watch him in its own strange way. "You have siblings." She said it like telling a secret to a still pond. "Not here, not in the basin, but far off, in the trees and stars and the sighing of wind through hills." You were born with 2 others, both pulled from the same fire and shadow that made you. Storm stared. I do? Trapeze nodded slowly. 2 halves of a thread you've never tugged. A sister who listens with her soul before her voice. Another who feels every heartache before it's spoken. Different from you, but not distant. Not in the way that matters. Storm sat up a little, brows furrowed. He didn't know what to say, so Trapeze continued. They were given to kind hands, just as you were. Raised in other ways, loved deeply. Her voice wavered, but only slightly. But you 3, you were born from something older than names or nests. Storm whispered, Do they know about me? Trapeze didn't answer right away. Then, they will. She shifted so her frayed cloak of a body wrapped around him more fully, cradling him like dusk cradles a lost star. When the time comes, you'll find each other. And when you do, she tapped a long finger to the center of his chest. You'll know. The way fog knows the lake. The way shadows find the places where light forgets to reach. Storm was quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. One that hummed with something unfamiliar. Something that could have been hope. Would they understand me? Trapeze tilted her head slowly. They won't just understand you, little one. They'll see you, the way only they can. The way only you can see them. Storm leaned back into her arms, letting the silence stretch again. And this time, he smiled, just a little wider. The fog outside the den thickened, curling low like it was listening. Inside, the green glow of the lantern moss flickered softly against the den's earthen walls. Storm lay curled beside Trapeze, small paws fidgeting with a frayed corner of his bedding. He had been quiet for most of his life, listening, watching, saying little. But tonight, the silence finally felt like it could hold his voice, not swallow it. So he asked, Do you know their names? Trapeze didn't move much, just turned her head toward him, shadows shifting over the button of her left eye. Esper. Starlight. That's what I was told. Her voice was low and steady, spoken softly, like a thread meant to be tied later. Storm's ears flicked, his head tilting, so he didn't see them. No. Her hand, stitched and wrapped like tattered cloth, gestured faintly. You were the only one I saw, the only egg placed in my arms. Storm frowned slightly, thinking. Who told you the names then? Who gave me to you? A pause, long enough to feel it. Someone who didn't stay. Trapeze's voice flickered at the edges, not evasive, but worn. They didn't say much, only that there were 3, that the other 2 would be delivered to places with light in them, and that you were for me. Storm blinked slowly. Did they say anything else? Only that the families chosen would not judge you for who your parents were. That caught him. Because of what my parents did? Trapeze's expression didn't shift, but her presence grew still, heavy, like a storm settling over water. Blight and chrome, she said, and even in this safe place, the names felt sharp. They were not strangers to stories, and those stories were rarely kind. Storm curled his tail closer to his body, listening. They were outlaws, Trapeze went on. Long before you were born, feared in every region they passed through. Not because they were monsters, but because they refused to be tamed. What does that mean? They lived by their own laws, fought when cornered, took what they needed, protected what was theirs. Storm looked down, so they were dangerous. Trapeze let out a breath, yes, but not evil. The world only knows how to call things one name at a time. Why were they caught? Because running catches up to everyone eventually. She looked at him carefully. And when they were taken, however it happened, the ones who apprehended them and found you 3 made a choice. To scatter you, hide you from the fire that followed your parents. Storm's voice softened. So the things they did, they couldn't undo them? Trapeze rested one of her long arms across her lap. Not all damage can be undone, but the ones who rehomed you tried to keep it from touching you. Storm let the silence return for a moment. It was the kind of silence he didn't mind. Full, not empty. Then came a quieter question, one that caught even him off guard. Did you ever have someone taken from you? Trapeze blinked slowly, then looked away, into the place between the roots where no light reached. Yes. Storm waited. Her voice came soft, rough in places like old fabric. Before you, I had a son. Storm didn't speak. The air in the den shifted, colder at the edges. He was mine, truly mine. Bright, delicate, always asking questions, just like you are now. She exhaled. The basin didn't take kindly to him. He wandered too far, too soon. By the time I found what was left... She stopped there. She didn't need to finish. Storm pressed himself gently into her side. I'm sorry. Trapeze's stitched hand rested on his back. I never thought I'd care for another child. Never wanted to. Her voice shook, barely. But then you were placed in my arms, quiet, waiting, and I felt him again. Not returned, but echoed. A chance to do right this time. Storm looked up, ears lowered slightly. What was his name? Trapeze closed her eyes. Thread. He stayed quiet, but the name curled around his heart. You can tell your sisters about him if you want. Storm nodded slowly. I think I will. Another pause. Then, do you think they'll remember me? Not yet, but they will. There's a connection between you, quiet but strong, and one day it'll pull taut. Storm closed his eyes, breathing in the soft scent of moss and fog. Then I'll follow it, like I followed you. And Trapeze, sewn together with grief and love, lowered her head and whispered, and this time, the fog will guide you home. Outside, the wind stirred gently, and in the hollow of the basin, where broken things stitched themselves into strange and beautiful shapes, a child made of silence finally dreamed of light